Welcome to the Fantasy Football Endgame with your hosts, Pierre Camus and Chris Moncano.
This is the Endgame for fantasy football, that is. Welcome, and first of all, hit subscribe. Don't miss all our videos. We got Waiver Wire. We got Start Sit each and every week. Game Day Live we're doing on Sundays. All the latest and greatest fantasy football advice here to help you dominate your leagues. All right, so I'm Pierre. I'm here to talk about wide receivers right now for week 4. And it was a great week for wide receivers, to be honest, especially if you were a rookie receiver. Let's talk about some of those notable performances, the top guys that might be on your list if you're looking to add a receiver this week. And of course, it starts and ends with Justin Jefferson. So let's just get this out of the way with he's your top waiver claim at any position this week, period. Not just because he had a monster game. Okay, so we don't want to overreact to a monster game, which is exactly why I'm going to tell you not to add somebody else who had a big game. But Justin Jefferson, we've been waiting for this. We thought he's a guy who's going to get a steady supply of targets. He's got to be the wide receiver 2 in Minnesota because they didn't add anybody else. All right, they drafted him to replace Stephon Diggs, which are some big shoes, as we can see. Maybe Diggs was a little underused, a little underappreciated in Minnesota based on what he's doing now. But Jefferson has to be that guy, right? They got BC Johnson, who's okay on the other side, but he's not somebody who's going to obviously be at that same caliber. Jefferson was dynamic at LSU, right? They spent an early pick on him. And as we are learning now, thanks for telling us, Vikings, they were easing him into action the first couple of weeks just because of all the craziness, 2020, right? No preseason games, right? Limited training camp, just give him some time, not force him into too much action. Of course, he was on the field, but they didn't want to throw him fully into the fire. That's why Thielen was getting so much of the target share. Well, now it's Jefferson's turn, and he responded with a huge game, right? He had that 71-yard touchdown, as you saw, but 175 yards and 7 catches. And the main thing is his target share, again, is just jumped up. And it's probably going to continue to be relatively high. I'm not saying he's going to put up those kind of numbers every week, but this is a team that needs some answers right now, right? Even with Dalvin Cook looking like one of the best running backs in football, they're 0-3. Kirk Cousins is not exactly having his best season, put it that way, but he did look a little better, and that was largely because Jefferson stepped up. They're going to need to take the reins off, right? He's going to have to sling it at some point, especially if their defense just keeps not playing defense. So Jefferson, I would say I'd feel really confident about how he's going to produce the rest of the season. He's the guy you do want to go out and add right now. Now, what about the other rookies? What if you don't want to spend up too much for a receiver? What if you want somebody who's got some upside but still isn't going to necessarily require your top claim? So Brandon Aiyuk is a guy I know a lot of people had expectations for in San Francisco, basically saying he's going to be Debo 2.0, right? He might be, all right, because they're using him the same way. The main thing that he did that was interesting wasn't just that he saw several targets, and in fact, he actually led the team in targets this week. Of course, that mainly is because George Kittle was out, and of course, Debo was out, and all the running backs are out, and everybody's out. But they used him in the backfield, and that touchdown, that 19-yard touchdown he had, came on an end around, and they gave him the ball in the backfield 3 times. So he's going to touch the ball in a variety of ways, kind of like another rookie who I don't think we're going to put a strong recommendation for this week, but that's Laviska Shenault. But they're going to be used very similarly. Obviously, Shenault is not quite on as good a team. But here's the thing. Aiyuk was a first-round pick. They have plans for him. I don't see Debo coming back fully healthy really soon, okay? I know he's expected to come back in a couple of weeks, maybe week 5. But Chris and I have talked about this since the preseason. That Jones injury that he suffered, that's not something to be taken lightly. There's a really high risk of re-injury, and there's a lot of guys who wait longer than he has. So it could be they're pushing him a little too much based on the circumstances. Point is, Aiyuk is going to have value in the present and probably throughout the rest of the season. Okay, so he could serve as their top wide receiver basically the rest of the year. So this is a guy that probably should be your next priority in terms of wide receiver waiver wire ads, regardless of who's at quarterback. And then T. Higgins also broke out, we know, in Cincinnati, 2 touchdowns. That's always nice. But here's the thing. A.J. Green sort of disappeared because they went to him way too much the first couple of weeks. Didn't happen, and now they kind of went away from him. That's not going to happen every week. I know Higgins has been coming on in every week. First week he didn't have a stat line, even though he was on the field. Second week, kind of quiet, did something, and then now he's exploding. I don't think it means he's going to take over as a wide receiver one. Tyler Boyd was the clear wide receiver one. I do think Higgins has value. I think he's going to have a little bit more value in standard leagues just because he's going to be used more in the end zone and more in those deep routes. I don't think he's going to catch a ton of short passes. I don't know that the reception volume will be there. AJ Green will get more comfortable in the offense, which, remember, that sounds weird, but he didn't play last year, so he really doesn't know the Zach Taylor offense, and of course he doesn't know Joe Burrow any more than anybody else. So I would say don't give up on AJ Green for T. Higgins. But Higgins does have value. I think all three receivers have value. John Ross does not have value. Okay, so you could drop him. But without a tight end also now, Drew Sample, he's not going to catch 9 passes every week, as we see. So I think that Higgins is somebody don't go too crazy for, but keep an eye on in a deeper league for redraft. I would say it's got to be 14 plus teams before you make an ad for him right now, unless you're hurting. Some other players you might want to consider that aren't rookies. Preston Williams is still only 30% rostered, which is surprising. I know his stat line hasn't been amazing. Remember, it's been a slow start for him working back from his ACL injury. The Dolphins weren't that great the first couple of weeks. They were great against Jacksonville, which maybe isn't saying much. But again, this is a player who is going to be the clear number 2 target in his offense at receiver. He's going to be used all over the field, right? I think that there's going to be games where the Dolphins are going to be forced to pass, like this week in Seattle, and you'll see the volume kind of tick up. So keep Williams in mind. He could be at the very least a solid wide receiver 4. So surprising to me that more people haven't caught on to add him yet. Now, what about the Buffalo Bills? Okay, so the Buffalo Bills apparently are going to throw for 400 yards every game. Maybe not. But it looks like you do want a piece of that offense, that pass game. Cole Beasley is always underappreciated because he's a small slot receiver, but he's outperforming all those other small slot receivers. And he has been also kind of ticking up each week, 100-yard game in week 3. And we can't use the excuses anymore of, the terrible matchup. Okay, the Rams were not a pushover, right? It's not a team like the Jets or the Dolphins that they were just going to roll, all right? Beasley is getting his, and I know John Brown was hurt, but, Beasley has always shown he could be productive. Late last season, he was productive, even with Brown there. So I think that Beasley's kind of an underappreciated guy that you do want to own in PPR leagues. I'm not saying he's quite every week wide receiver 3 status, but you could flex him out. You could put him in, a great option for bye weeks and injuries because he always has kind of that consistent target volume. All right, some games will be bigger than others, but don't sleep on Beasley. And then Braxton Berrios is very much like Cole Beasley 2.0. He's a small slot receiver, and he plays in the same division. Difference is he plays for a team that is kind of the opposite in terms of production as far as Buffalo, and that would be the Jets. But if you think of it this way, okay, Beasley is the 3rd receiving option on Buffalo, which is pretty good these days. Berrios is the number 1 option for the Jets, which may not say much, but still, he's going to get his targets. He's getting his targets. Doesn't look like Jamison Crowder is coming back real soon. Perriman not coming back real soon. They're playing on Thursday this week, so I doubt they're going to rush him out there in a short week. It's not like, I'm sure they kind of want to win, but it's not like they really think they're going to win anyways. Okay, although they're playing Denver. But still, the point remains that those receivers are still out. Berrios has shown up. He's the top guy there, so you know what? You have to have interest in him. 64 yards is not a lot, but he's got a touchdown each of the last 2 weeks. And he's going to be getting looks because this team's going to have to pass the ball a lot. So don't forget him. Randall Cobb kind of showed up this week, another slot guy. And I know it's hard to trust the Texans receivers on a week-to-week basis. But even with Will Fuller out there, it's interesting that Cobb did outperform Brandon Cooks and Fuller. And so he's kind of gaining trust because each game now as a Texan, he's kind of gone up and up with his production. So 95 yards and a touchdown is nothing to sneeze at. I think that he's going to have his share of solid games. No, he's not going to ever have a huge monster breakout game. But you know what? If you're looking for that at this point, you go with one of the rookies I already mentioned, that ceiling. Cobb is kind of that steady performer you can plug and play as needed based on matchup, of course. Greg Ward is another guy that I think is a little underappreciated just because, well, we think of him as a quarterback, right, in college, and then we think of him in the XFL and all sorts of things. Came on last year, did okay as a receiver, and now he's the leading receiver for the Eagles. And to make things more interesting, Deshaun Jackson is also now battling an injury, may not play this week, who knows, not going to be 100%. Alshon Jeffrey, of course, still hasn't played. Jalen Reagor's out. JJ Arcega-Whiteside is, I don't know, on a milk carton. They have no receivers, okay? So Greg Ward is it. And now Dallas Goedert. Oh, yeah, Dallas Goedert, their second tight end, because, well, they can just roll out their tight ends. No, not anymore. Okay, so Greg Ward, he, by default, is going to get a ton of looks, all right? So you have to have some interest in him in PPR leagues just because of the volume is going to be there. And he's shown that he can be productive with what he's doing. This week, he had 8 catches for 72 yards and a touchdown. That's not too bad. That'll play on any team, all right? And he had a team-high 11 targets. So I think Ward definitely needs some more love on the waiver wire. Now, he may not win you weeks, but at this point, you're not going to find too many of those guys on the waiver wire anyways, unless you land a guy like Jefferson. All right, and then quickly, a couple more names here. KJ Hamler, I know he had a kind of disappointing week, thought he might be a nice sleeper, and then we remember that Denver's offense is terrible. But you know what? There'll be better weeks, right? He is still going to be involved, so I would say don't count out Hamler just yet. And he does have a better matchup this particular week than he did before when, they kind of got trounced by Tampa. Andy Isabella, a lot of people, especially dynasty owners, have been waiting for him to break out. I'm not saying this is it because he's done this before. He'll make a big play. He'll catch a touchdown or two, and then he'll fade again. I know he was out there because Christian Kirk, of course, was out. I don't know if Kirk's coming back yet, but if it's a growing issue for a speed receiver, it could linger. So if Kirk is out again, Isabella is an interesting name. But again, don't assume he'll necessarily pop a deep one or score a touchdown again. Very boom bust, but definitely someone to keep an eye on. I did already mention Gabriel Davis because of Buffalo's offense. Davis kind of came onto the field because of Brown's calf injury, and he did okay, right? 4 catches for 81 yards. But again, that's very much dependent on the health. If all 3 receivers are healthy, there's really no reason to play him because he's the 4th receiver, even on Buffalo's offense, which it's going to regress at some point. You can't be starting a 4th receiver on his team. But that said, Brown has had his share of injuries. Stephon Diggs in the past has had his share of injuries. So kind of a guy to monitor because he's looked pretty good as a rookie with very little expectations basically coming into the season. And then let's end with this. All right, speaking of 4th receivers on the team, Cedric Wilson Jr. Okay, so if you look at just the stat line, you're going to run out and you're going to spend 50% of your fab on Cedric Wilson Jr. because, oh my God, he's on the Cowboys. And look at that. He scored twice. And, he was the best player on the field for the Cowboys, not named Dak Prescott yesterday. And no. Okay, so besides the fact that you had never heard of Cedric Wilson Jr. before yesterday, let's talk about this. This was a game where in the second half, the Cowboys obviously had to pass and pass and pass. There's a reason Prescott went over 400 yards because they were down 2 scores. Seattle made a very obvious concerted effort to shut down Zeke Elliott, and they did. It worked. They went all out to stop the run, and they made them throw the ball. And they almost came back, and it almost worked. But the point is they were leaving Wilson just running wide open because guess what? He's the 4th receiver. Okay, they're crowding the box, letting Cooper go, letting Gallup go. Gallup made some big plays too. They weren't worried about Cedric Wilson. So he made a nice play, give him credit, right? That one catch and run, he went all the way down, showed some speed. And then the other one, he was just left running free. So he had a nice game, give him credit, but there's no reason you should be adding him in fantasy because he's still the 4th receiver. And this is not going to happen each week, especially the Cowboys finally, their schedule lets up a little bit. And so they're not going to necessarily be forced to pass it that many times. So I'm not saying don't add him at all. You could add Wilson if you want to, but make it a free bid, like, throw a buck on him. That's it. Do not use a top waiver claim on Cedric Wilson Jr. This is what we call an outlier game. All right, classic outlier game. All right, that'll do it for wide receivers waiver wire. And of course, check out all our other episodes. As I already mentioned, we're going to be here each and every week to help you win and get an advantage over the competition. Thanks.